Dracula by Bram Stoker, Chapter 12, Dr. Seward's Diary, 18th of September. I drove at once to Hillingham and arrived early. Keeping my cab at the gate, I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently and rang as quietly as possible, for fear I disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped to only bring a servant to the door. After a while, finding no response, I knocked and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants as they should lie abed at such an hour, for it was now 10 o'clock, and so rang and knocked again, but more impatiently, and still without response. Hitherto I had blamed only the servants, but now a terrible fear began to assail me. With this desolation but another link in the chain of doom which seemed drawing tight around us, was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? I knew that minutes, even seconds of delay might mean hours of danger to Lucy, if she had again one of those frightful relapses, and I went round the house to try if I could find by any chance an entry anywhere. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, and I returned baffled to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of a swiftly driven horse's feet. They stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped out, "Then was you? And just arrived. How is she? Are we too late? Did you not get my telegram?" I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only got his telegram early in the morning, and had not lost a minute in coming here, and that I could not make anyone in the house hear me. He paused, and raised his hat as he said solemnly, "Then I fear we are too late. God's will be done." With his usual recuperative energy he went on, "Come, if there be no way open to get in, we must make one. Time is in all to us now." We went round to the back of the house, where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case. Handing it to me, pointed to the iron bars which guarded the window. I attacked them at once, and had very soon cut through 3 of them. Then, with a long, thin knife, we pushed back the fastening of the sashes and opened the window. I helped the professor in and followed him. There was no one in the kitchen or in the servants' rooms, which were all close at hand. We tried all the rooms as we went along, and in the dining room, dimly lit by rays of light through the shutters, found 4 servant women lying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for their stertorous breathing and the acrid smell of laudanum in the room left no doubt as to their condition. Van Helsing and I looked at each other. As we moved away, he said, "We can attend to them later." Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two we paused at the door to listen, but there was no sound that we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. How shall I describe what we saw? On the bed lay 2 women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she was covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the draught through the broken window, showing the drawn, white face, with a look of terror fixed upon it. By her side lay Lucy, with face white, and still more drawn. The flowers which had been round her neck were found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing the little 2 wounds which we had noticed before, but looking horridly white and mangled. Without a word the professor went over the bed, and his head almost touching poor Lucy's breast. Then he gave a quick turn of his head, as of one who listens, and leaping to his feet he cried out to me, "It is not too late yet! Quick! Quick, bring the brandy!" I flew downstairs, and returning with it, taking care to smell and taste it, lest it too were drugged like the decanter of sherry which I found on the table. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied that the narcotic was wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing. He rubbed the brandy, as on another occasion, on her lips and gums, and on her wrists, and the palms of her hands. He said to me, "I can do this, all that can be at present. You go wake those maids, flick them in the face with a wet towel, and flick them hard. Make them get heat and fire and warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need to be heated before we can do anything more." I went at once, and found a little difficulty in waking 3 of the women. The 4th was only a young girl, and the drug had evidently affected her more strongly, so I lifted her on the sofa and let her sleep. The others were dazed at first, but as remembrance came back to them they cried and sobbed in a hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and would not let them talk. I told them that one life was bad enough to lose, and that if they delayed they would sacrifice Miss Lucy. So, sobbing and crying, they went about their way, half clad as they were, and prepared fire and water. Fortunately the kitchen boiler fires were still alive, and there was no lack of hot water. We got a bath and carried Lucy out as she was placed her in it. Whilst we were busy chafing her limbs, there was a knock on the hall door. One of the maids ran off, hurried on some more clothes, and opened it. Then she returned and whispered to us that there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that he must wait, for we could see no one now. She went away with the message, and, engrossed with our work, I clean forgot all about him. I never saw in all my experience the Professor work in such deadly earnest. I knew, as he knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, though with the sternest look that his face could wear. If that were all, I would stop here where we are now, and let her fade away into peace, for I see no light in life over her horizon. He went on with his work, with, if possible, renewed and more frenzied vigour. Presently we began to be conscious that the heat was beginning to be of some effect. Lucy's heart beat a trifle more audible to the stethoscope, and her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed. As we lifted her from the bath and rolled her on a hot sheet to dry her, he said to me, "The first gain is ours. Check to the king." We took to Lucy in another room. We had, by now, been prepared, and laid her in a bed and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief round her throat. She was still unconscious, and was quite as bad as, if not worse than, we had ever seen her. Van Helsing called in one of the women and told her to stay with her, and not to take her eyes off her till we returned, and then beckoned me out of the room. "We must consult as to what is to be done," he said, as we descended the stairs. In the hall he opened the dining-room door, and we passed in. He closed the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already drawn, with that obedience to the etiquette of death which the British woman of the lower classes always rigorously observes. The room was, therefore, dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purposes. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by a look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something, so I waited for an instant, and he spoke. "What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and that soon, or that poor girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You are exhausted already. I am exhausted too. I fear to trust those women, even if they would have courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who will open his veins for her?